Welcome back to Tell Your Story Alaska. Today is another interview with, well, I want to say friend, but we don't know each other super well yet. But a few weeks ago, I took my kids to the park and I saw you and I recognized your hat, and we have mutual friends too.
Yep.
But I asked about you coming on the podcast because Jeffrey Chon is the owner and founder, with his wife Mariah, the founder of Genesis Coffee. Now, Genesis Coffee is something I see when I go to Three Bears. That's how I know about it, and through our mutual friends. So, Jeffrey Chon, we're going to hear about your story. I know you grew up as like an atheist and in a gang, and then now you have this Genesis Coffee, and you get your coffee from Ethiopia. And I'm just going to hear all about that today. So, Jeffrey, thanks for coming on the show.
It's an honor to be here, and looking forward to unpacking this session.
We will unpack it. And you actually were here. You brought me some coffee here.
Yeah.
It says Genesis Coffee Lab, Ethiopia. Some words I can't pronounce. And then it's cocoa, brown sugar, and citrus.
Yeah. Tasting notes for coffee.
Flavored coffee.
No flavors. No. It's specialty coffee. Best coffees in the world. They have tasting notes, just like wine. So, just like certain grapes produce certain, notes in the wine. And so high-end coffee, specialty coffee is the same thing, where you can have coffees that have natural, flavor notes of berries and chocolates. And we don't do any flavoring.
Really?
Our coffee is like the equivalent to a Yukon King Salmon. This is the best stuff. If you ever had a Yukon King Salmon or a Tuscoquin King Salmon, you're like, wow, this is what salmon should taste like.
So you don't add cocoa, brown sugar, or citrus.
No.
Those are just like words to describe the taste.
That's correct. This is some of the finest literal coffee in the world. I think approximately less than 2% of the coffee in the world is considered this specialty grade.
Well, that's okay. And
not much.
And then this is from Ethiopia, I see. And why is Ethiopian coffee?
So Ethiopia is the birthplace of coffee.
Oh.
So in Genesis, in the beginning, when God created the earth, he put coffee seeds in Ethiopia. So just like our fish and game is wild in Alaska, we really, as Alaskans, we love the fact that we have fish and game, right?
Yeah.
When we hear about farm-raised salmon, we just go, that stuff is not Alaskan salmon.
Right. And it even looks different. They're like different color.
100%. Yeah. So all coffee in different countries are transplants from Ethiopian genetics.
Oh, all coffee.
That's correct.
I didn't know that. Yeah. So are most coffees like GMOs? Like, do they mess around with them, or are they just bred?
They're just planted in different nations and different soil and mass produced, so it's not going to have the same taste like a Copper River Red that's wild. So the difference between Ethiopian coffee and all coffee is Ethiopia is the only country that could boast wild coffee.
Okay.
That's where it comes from. So just like a Copper River Red doesn't need a USDA organic sticker, Ethiopia doesn't need anything other than people that know that's the birthplace of coffee. Okay. So when you take the original place where God put the coffee and you taste where it was meant to grow, you go, wow, that's why Ethiopian coffee is so good.
So you kind of feel a connection, like this is the way it was meant to be by the creator. That's why it's the best.
It's the only coffee people ask all the time, why don't you sell coffee from other countries? Well, number one, we're not connected to other countries as deeply, but we really love the quality and taste of where God put it.
Yeah.
And so does 75% of roasters in the world. 75% of coffee roasters have Ethiopian as their profiles and their offerings because it's so good.
Really? Mm-hmm. Well, that's fascinating. And does big places like Starbucks, are they Ethiopia?
They use some Ethiopian, but
they use the lesser stuff, not like Genesis Coffee. Yeah. So I read in your website that you did a newlywed trip to Ethiopia, and that's how it kind of all started.
Yeah. So my wife and I, after we got married almost 21 years ago now, so we're celebrating our 21st anniversary here next month.
Hey, congrats! And four children, right?
4 children.
Yeah.
Four boys. And so, anyways, a year into our marriage, we were supernaturally led through different relationships and connections to Ethiopia before we had kids, and we had no idea what we were expecting or getting ourselves into. We just knew that Ethiopia was a very difficult place. I don't know if you remember, like in the 80s, you'd see the feed the children commercials and bloated babies and starvation. And so we had no idea what to expect. And when we went there, we did see it was at the time one of the poorest countries in the world, but we had no idea that we would also meet a crazy church planting movement.
Oh.
And so 100% indigenous, born and bred. Like this is we knew about this church a little bit, but we didn't know the depth of it till we got there. But basically, the long story short is the church that we have partnered with the last 20 years has grown to 800,000 and about 900 plants throughout the country.
Wow.
And it's what I would consider a legitimate revival.
Sure.
A legitimate sovereign move of God, because it was born of the Spirit amongst the people. There was no missionary that came and said, "Hey, you need Jesus." It's like, no, the church is actually almost 2,000 years old, and it's the Bible, the Old Testament talks about Ethiopia, the Queen of Sheba, right?
Yeah,
the Ethiopian eunuch.
I looked this up before you came in preparing for you to come, and I looked up that in Ethiopia has the oldest Orthodox church in the world, or likely in the world, because tradition says that the apostles Matthew and Bartholomew went there and first evangelized Ethiopia. So it's actually one of the oldest Christian places in the world.
So super deep history, obviously, but in the last, I believe it's like 40 years, Ethiopia is deeply Orthodox and Muslim, but in the last 40, 50 years, it's become about 15% evangelical.
Oh, wow.
So the Orthodox is very rigid and very legalistic, very old Jewish style temple, like all the things Jesus poked and prodded at. And the church that we work with, called the Ethiopia Emmanuel United Church, a lot of the leaders were Orthodox priests. That got radically born again and saved.
Wow.
And started planting churches through a more New Testament biblical based model.
Now, let me ask you something. You mentioned something about Jesus poking and prodding. I know this is kind of about Genesis coffee, but this is interesting to me. You talk about Jesus poking and prodding against sort of rigidness, and you came very alive when you said that. So, like, what do you mean by that, and why is that so important to you? Like, anti this idea of rigidness in religion?
Yeah. So, my family were Buddhists.
Oh,
so I grew up. I'm a first generation Korean American. My parents moved to the United States, and then I was born here. I was actually supposed to be aborted. My dad had a vasectomy in Korea. My sister was born in Korea.
North or south?
South Korea.
Wow, okay.
And so they didn't want any more children when they immigrated to the United States.
Yeah.
And so lo and behold, they got pregnant, and there's me, and I wasn't even supposed to be born, but my great aunt stepped in, who was a Christian.
Wow.
And said, "You will not abort this baby." And I didn't find out about this until my 20s, way after I got.
Really? Did that freak you out, like when you found out?
It actually made me quite sad, but it also made me really aware of the goodness, mercy, and kindness of God, that when he has a plan, he'll fulfill it.
Yeah. Yeah.
No man's going to stop that plan. So anyways, to answer your question, because I didn't grow up a Christian, when I did get radically saved in my, I was like 15, I didn't have that church background of we always do things this way.
Yeah.
Like we worship, we pray, we do the typical church service, right? I had more of a fresh lens. So when I got saved, immediately I wanted to read the Bible. This is what I'm giving my life to.
Yeah.
I'm an all or nothing type, And so when I especially read the New Testament in the book of Acts specifically, I was like wrecked, man, in a good way. Whoa, This type of church is the real thing.
Are you thinking of Acts chapter 2?
That's right.
Where they gathered and shared and all that?
Acts 2:42, man, they were devoted not to a service. They weren't devoted to a building. They weren't devoted to traditions. They were devoted to God, to one another, to the breaking of bread, fellowship, prayer. Those things that have nothing to do with the church service, right?
Yeah.
Or the traditions of man. Those are kingdom principles that they lived out, and they gave everything to God and to one another. And so that is a huge part of my life.
I mean, it sounds like when you see the church acting in those ways, it almost breaks your heart a little bit because you didn't grow up with it. So you're not like the frog in hot, the slowly warming up water. But you jumped into like the church world and you saw, we do this because it's how we always done it.
Yeah.
And they were missing out.
I've made many pastors angry because of just questioning, not because of rebellion, but just because of like when you take a fresh believer that has no background and you just say, hey, why do we do this? You'd be amazed how many leaders don't like being questioned.
Really?
Oh yeah. I've experienced this a lot in let's see now, 27 years of walking with the Lord. So I got saved 27 years ago. So I've worked in mega churches, small churches, third world churches in the United States, and I've seen a little of everything from the mud hut church in Africa to your multi-thousand congregation member church in the United States. And I've seen a little of everything. And what I notice a lot in the church is people have a high reverence for tradition, but not the fear of God and the love of God and what God actually wanted. So, when I read the New Testament, I don't see Jesus building a building and having a service from 9-11 and saying, hey, let's have donuts and coffee and falafel and hummus and let's have a service. No, it's modeling the Father. Jesus said, I came to reveal the Father. And he didn't start with a big service. He started with picking out 12 guys and showing them what he came to and discipleship. Even when he left the earth, right? He didn't say, therefore, go and build a bunch of buildings and have churches. No, he said, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and teaching them everything I've commanded you. And so those are the things. I'm not saying church services are bad. I'm saying we need to be healthy churches that actually follow.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. And I'll question that all the time.
Yeah.
If I see a leader where I feel like they got some Pharisee juice in them, I'll call it out. I have no problem calling out. We're not supposed to fear, man. We're not supposed to fear traditions and we don't just do things because we always do it. Like that's the perfect way to stifle your growth. Jesus didn't even heal people the same way. He did it differently.
Did you you talk about being in mega churches, all kinds of different kinds of churches, the huts in Africa to the mega church in the United States. Do those similar hints of Pharisee, is that true in Africa and as well as here?
That's a really good question. Yes, there is, but what we've noticed in Ethiopia specifically, I can only speak for where we've worked, that it's just more raw and simple. When you work with churches in the middle of nowhere that don't have electricity, that don't have fog machines and lights and PowerPoints and all these things that
I can tell you're a huge fan of fog machines and flashing lights.
They don't get hung up on those things in presenting. They come together to pray. Yeah. They come together to fellowship. They come together to genuinely seek God because they don't have Denny's to go to afterwards. They don't have, a restaurant to go to. They have God and they have each other. And my wife and I, that's one of the reasons we love going to Ethiopia is we love seeing raw church. Because you can't take our paradigm, our way of doing the American church and plug it into North Korea.
Right.
You can't. And so that just shows me that the kingdom principles should apply to any. It's not bound by a nation, right? It's not bound by even a culture, but the way we do things here gets so foggy to me. That
would you say it's like really distracted?
Complicated.
There's a lot of like entertainment, stimulation, or programs. Would you say?
Yeah, and to tell you the truth, I'm all about order, and I'm all about even having good systems. But when those things replace deep devotion to fellowship, to praying, to genuinely breaking bread in relationship, that's a good way to put it. When it veers off from the greatest commandments of loving God and loving one another, and that really being the foundation and the focus, where an unbeliever can go to a church and say, conclude, those are the most loving people I've ever met. Those are the most devoted people I've ever met to God and to each other, then your church is doing well. But when the average person goes to church and says, that was a good service, that's a disservice to God.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
That's actually, I'd go as far as to say, that's an embarrassing representation of the gospel. That's an embarrassing representation of a 1 John God that says, God is love.
Yeah.
Not a church. Just think about this. If you ask the average person on the street, what's church? They'll tell you, it's a service on Sunday. How many will say, those are the most radical lovers we've ever met? The most generous people, the most pure people, the healthiest people, the most thoughtful people. Do you think you'll hear that?
Usually I don't hear that.
Yeah, I usually don't hear that. Well, I think that's what Jesus died for. That's what I'm after.
I'm really fascinated by that because, I've seen a movement specifically in the Native Alaskan community towards the Eastern Orthodox Church, which is like the epitome of a heavy emphasis on tradition. And the people who either convert or are part of that church describe how these traditions are rich and enriching their faith. And because there's an awe and there's a reverence in it. But then your story is sort of the opposite. You come from the gangs of LA, right? Or California.
Yeah.
So, and when you see tradition like that, you see pharisaical activity. And so it's just interesting to me, the different perspectives. I can't wrap my mind around it. Like, where does the truth land? But, I personally, I do see value in tradition. I guess I kind of land somewhere in the middle. I see value in tradition, but I don't see it as foundational, like maybe the Eastern Orthodox Church does. But for you, what you are looking for is sincerity, real fellowship, and Christ honoring get-togethers.
Yeah. Well, the best example I could use is Jesus. He didn't say, I came to abolish the law. I came to fulfill it. So even the Son of God, he didn't slam people for tradition. I think that's wrong. I think we're supposed to honor tradition. I think we're supposed to honor culture and the way things are done. It's when that becomes your faith, that's when Jesus has a problem. That's why when even like the disciples, for instance, when they were eating on the Sabbath, picking wheat kernels, right?
Yeah.
And the Pharisees got all hung up about that. And Jesus like, chill out, guys. They're hungry. Need to eat. You know what I'm saying? And I believe that's why Jesus was so hard on the Pharisees. It's not because they believed in their tradition so deeply. It's because they were void of God so deeply.
Yeah, the traditions had taken the place of actual worship.
They didn't see the heart and the why of God in the tradition even.
Yeah.
In fact, Jesus was very respectful of the tradition. He quoted the Old Testament on a regular basis. And he never slandered them for truth. He slandered them for saying, hey, you are acting out of opposite nature of God.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I really like what you just said. And it makes me even think Jesus talked about like you do these traditions, but you don't understand even why you do them.
Bingo.
And so I feel like
if you're going to preach tradition, at least understand it.
Yeah. And I think that's my point, is that if you engage in very traditional things, the danger is forgetting why you're doing it, just getting into like the methods. But and then on the opposite hand, if you're pure, like it's just organic and relational, you're in danger of being irreverent. And of course, we want reverence and genuine worship. And tradition can provide that, but there's risks there. Pure organic, you risk on the other side of the spectrum. And so, yeah, it's really interesting. All right, so tell me more about how did you ended up going to Ethiopia as a young couple. You said you made some deep relationships there. Tell me about how that came about.
Yeah, so just a quick little backdrop is when I was in a gang, I always longed for genuine family. When you grow up in a dysfunctional home and you experience the pain of a dysfunctional family, I always wanted to be with authentic people. And believe it or not, gangs are some of the most authentic people you'll ever meet. In fact, they actually live kingdom principles better than most believers. They'll actually take a bullet for their brother. I know a lot of I've been a part of churches where people would not take a bullet for each other. In fact, they would slam each other. They would split off and even break apart from the church without honor, without blessing. And in the gang, they'll actually take a bullet for you. And so just because gangs are demonic in nature, evil, doesn't mean anybody can represent kingdom principles.
Yeah.
Loving people, right? And so when I was in a gang, I learned that. No matter what happens, you have to back your brother. And so when we went to Ethiopia, that's how this church lived. These young leaders that started getting saved and not going away from the Orthodox Coptic church and trying to build more of a New Testament church, they got severely persecuted. A lot of their lives got threatened by leaving the Orthodox Coptic church in Ethiopia is almost worse than becoming a Christian if you're a Muslim.
Really?
You gotta understand, it's the Orthodox Church is almost 2,000 years old. So imagine 2 millennium of tradition. You're talking culture. You're not talking family culture. You're talking national culture.
Wow.
So we have friends that have been severely beaten and almost killed leaving the Orthodox Church.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
That's fascinating.
The average pastor that has left the Orthodox Church will have a similar testimony of we were severely beaten and almost killed by the Coptic Church.
So that Orthodox Church over there is so embedded in their deep history.
Yeah.
They're going to persecute people who leave. Like, this is the church. They don't see, Protestants as part of the church. Like, that's
you're not Orthodox, you're not a Christian to that.
Really?
So anyways, when you hang out with that type of level of devotion to God, when people are willing to almost die for something, they believe it. And so
like when it costs you everything, you treasure it more than anything.
Yeah. And I just want to add this. My wife and I didn't go to Ethiopia thinking we were missionaries to Ethiopians. We just went there wanting to connect relationally. That's our style is, Jesus is the same way. I call you friends. The Apostle Paul says it the same way. We're co-laborers with Christ. And so we went to Ethiopia with the posture and a position of we're just going to go co-labor with brothers and sisters. We're not trying to Western missionary evangelize them. They're already further ahead. They've already planted hundreds of churches. Yeah. We can learn from them.
Yeah.
But what I learned from them was their deep communal Acts style living. And I just love that. To me, it's like, I don't want to say gangster because that has a negative connotation, but it has that very tribal, relational feel of like, this is the way church was meant to be. We were meant to suffer together. We were meant to be together. We were meant to walk with God in such a deep way together. And what I didn't see was a normal church service Christianity there.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so they believe every day's church. They pray together throughout the week. It's here, like, try to get a bunch of people to pray together for 3 times a week.
It's very difficult. Yeah.
Well, they do that as a lifestyle. It's normal for an Ethiopian evangelical culture to fast weekly.
Really?
Weekly.
Wow.
Weekly.
That's a lot of fasting.
Weekly. And
they're probably some of the healthiest people.
And they don't do like American fast, like fast your phone, fast chocolate. No, they fast food.
Yeah.
Like biblical fast.
Yeah.
They don't eat. Weekly to pray together.
That's amazing.
In fact, the first time I went to a church service in Ethiopia, I'll never forget this. I was totally American. I was going to this, and God just totally wrecked my life in a good way. We went to this church service. We showed up a little early. I walked in. There was 1,200 people with their faces on the floor crying out to God. And I literally, I walked in with like this meet and greet mentality. Like, I'm going to walk in and people are going to be waiting there to meet us and greet us. We're the Alaskans, Americans coming to visit. I walk in and I go, oh my gosh, I better get on the floor.
Wow.
And
so no greeters, just people on the floor praying.
There was 1,200 people literally praying, looking down.
Wow.
And I was so convicted in a good way. I was just like, wow, God, that's my heart. I just never really seen it. But I joined right in, and it was actually one of the first times I was in a church service where I couldn't stand because the presence and the weight of God was so heavy in there in a good way. Like it almost looked like there was like a cloud in there almost.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine 1,200 people in unison praying deeply for God to move. Don't you think you'd feel something?
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, I felt it.
Yeah.
I felt it. I was like, yep. I think I could work here. I think I could be a part of this.
You kind of, I don't know if this is a good segue, but it reminds me of like recently, like in the news, people signing up for the military, the number of people has grown exponentially. And they're saying one of the reasons is with the new administration is that the way they're presenting it is like, come and join the military and do extremely hard things. That's what people want. But if you present like a church, like come and it'll be like easy and low key and chill, it's like, no, thanks. I can do that at home. But it's like, come and be in the presence of God. Come do hard things. That's when people show up. That's what people want. That's what it reminded me of. Yeah. So tell me about, you've mentioned several times about growing up in LA and gangs. Your parents were Buddhists. You mentioned being an atheist. Would you tell me let's go into that story a little bit.
So the long story short on that is I grew up in a very, my dad was an extreme alcoholic.
Okay.
And very, very intense environment. And so I just kind of felt like, how could God exist? My life is literally terrible. How could there be a loving God? The concept of God, I had so much anger, so much sadness in life that I wouldn't even think there could be such a thing, and long story short, my dad was in a severe hunting accident in California. We used to hunt birds out in Salton Sea. That's way east of Los Angeles, out in the desert. And long story short, he got shot by a drunk guy and he almost died and almost lost his business. Well, excuse me, he did lose his business. He was a painter, contractor. And he found out about taxi driving in Bethel, Alaska. So
there's a lot of taxi drivers there. I know that.
Yep. And so I was in 8th grade, and I'll never forget, my parents said, we're moving to Alaska. Now you got to understand, I live in Los Angeles. And I'm in
eighth grade,
and I'm in eighth grade, like junior high. Like I'm used to malls, the beach, McDonald's, LA. That's all I know.
Right.
And
the weather never changes. It's like so, 80 degrees all the time.
February of 95. Yep. This, oh my gosh. It's February, right?
It is, yeah.
This is it just hit me right now during this podcast. This is my 30th year anniversary in Alaska.
There you go, 30 years.
Wow. Okay, so February 95.
Happy anniversary.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, there you go.
That's right. I'm going to go home and be like, it's been...
You got to text your wife right now. Guess what?
So,
February of 95.
So, yeah, anyways, back then, Reeve was flying, and this is actually really fun. So imagine a 8th grade Californian from LA flying to Bethel, Alaska in February.
Yeah, that's the coldest month, I think.
I literally get in the plane in Anchorage, and it was the first time I had to walk out of the airport to get on the plane.
Yeah.
And I was like freaking out because it was like I don't know what that plane was. It was like 4 props. I was like, am I going back in time? So I get in the plane, right? And the seat's not even working. Like it won't stay up. It's like reclined. It's the old plane.
Yeah.
So I'm already freaking out. So we're literally landing in Bethel, and the pilot says, that we're landing. And I look out the window, and I'm used to seeing millions of lights.
Yeah.
I looked out the window, and there was like 3 lights. That's what it looked like to me.
Yeah.
We get down, and this is what's funny. It's 40 below. I'm in a sweater. I get to the bottom of the stairs, and I almost slip and fall and hit my head. No, seriously, like this is welcome to Bethel.
Yeah.
And immediately, I'll never forget every snot in my nose. I'm not trying to sound gross, but it was weird. I never felt it. Like I felt everything freezing. Like I took a breath, and it was like, welcome to Alaska.
Yeah.
So anyways, that's how we ended up in Alaska.
Okay.
A hunting accident, and my dad starting a cab company out in rural Alaska. And I became immediately aware that I was not in California anymore.
Yeah, no kidding. With your boogers freezing off the plane.
Literally Bethel, Alaska.
So you hated it.
I hated it so bad just because I was used to nice weather and options. I would dream of McDonald's. I would actually write poems like, I wish I can go to McDonald's. Like I was so depressed. And that's when I got heavy into drugs, really heavy into smoking, all types of things. And I was actually a half decent kid growing up in an abusive home. Like I was very athletic and I loved math. It was, but when I got to Bethel, it was devastating. And
you had was that your departure from your gang in LA also? That move?
Kind of. That's a whole nother story.
Okay, we don't have to open that can of worms.
Yeah, but basically, got to Bethel. No, it's a quick explanation. Got to Bethel, and I went crazy. Like I told you, I'm an all or nothing type.
Yeah,
I went crazy, and my parents saw this, and so we actually left Bethel.
Oh,
because they thought I was probably die.
And
so we left Bethel after less than a year.
Wow.
Went back to California.
Oh. Okay.
Listen to this. We got back to California, and my dad's like, we're going back to Bethel. Like this is the type of crazy home I grew up in. No, literally.
I'm stressed out just listening.
No, it is stressful. And I actually told my parents, I was like, I'm not going back there. And so we actually, my parents left me and my brother and sister in California. My sister was 17, turning 18, and got us an apartment. I refused to go. And that's when my parents went back to Bethel.
Yeah.
That's when I got involved in a gang because I had no parents now. Now I went even crazier.
Oh, okay.
Went to jail, selling drugs. Now I'm in jail. And the judge says, where's your parents? And I said, well, they're in Bethel, Alaska. I know it's a crazy story, but long story short, my dad has to fly back to California to get me out of jail. And the judge says, the only way I'll let you out of jail is you have to fly back with your dad to Bethel.
Wow.
So I went back to Bethel, And
you're just doomed to be a
now I'm like, oh my gosh. Here, and so now I'm like, now I got gang background, drug dealing, and I'm 15 now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when like things got really crazy for me because I was so depressed. And I'm just gonna go into my salvation story.
Sure.
So in the summer of 97, my brother got radically saved in Bethel. We were both on our way to a party, and there was a tent meeting outside of the Assembly of God Church in the Assembly of God Church in Bethel. There was a missions team from Wasilla Assembly of God.
There you go.
Doing a youth like a tent meeting.
Okay.
And I was walking to a party and I heard music. And I thought, oh, I'm gonna go see if there's any chicks in town. You know, typical high school boy. And I walked in and my brother was there. And I thought, oh, he's probably here for the same thing. We're looking for girls, right? And so I just sat there and it was like my first time in a service. So I just sat there and looked around and saw all these people singing. And I thought, this is really lame. I'm just being honest. But I sat through the whole message and they did a call to salvation and my brother got and now I'm like really interested. I'm like, holy smokes, is this really happening? They don't even touch him. He just goes up to receive Jesus Christ as his Lord and Savior, and he literally falls by himself and he's weeping. It's the first time at that point I'd seen my brother cry.
Wow.
So he's like 17, I'm like 15. Yeah. He's weeping. It scared me so bad I left. I literally just walked out in that moment. I don't remember anything other than like, I need to get out of here because this is too weird. Well, I get home and my brother comes home. We shared a room.
Yeah.
It's like, Jeff, I met Jesus. And I'm like, for real? What is it? He's like, I'm getting rid of all my pornography. I'm burning all my CDs with cuss words. Like, I call it the Holy Spirit microwave.
Yeah.
He literally, and I mean literally,
he did all those things.
I've been in the ministry for over 2 decades.
Yeah.
And I've rarely seen somebody quit something in 5 minutes. I've rarely met someone that's quit porn, drugs.
Usually it's like a progression, right? It takes time.
That 5-minute encounter. And so I thought, oh, I'll watch this and see. Well, months go by and he's still on fire. And I'll never forget.
Were you kind of waiting for it to fade off?
I was waiting because he was my best friend that partied with me, and no longer I didn't have my party friend anymore.
Oh, okay.
So I took it personally.
Yeah. Did you feel kind of some betrayal or something?
I didn't just feel betrayal, man. I felt abandoned.
Oh, okay.
I mean, imagine your best friend, your brother happened to be your best friend, and he no longer partied with you.
Right.
Yeah. And so, anyways, he had this NIV teen study Bible, one of those pink and hologrammy looking Bible. I'll never forget just seeing that Bible all the time.
That's so nice.
In the room, and I'm just like, and he would be reading it. Well, the long story short is, after a few months, I got very crazy. And took it personal that he would party with me. So I would threaten him like, Chris, I'm going to burn your Bible if you don't party with me anymore. You're stupid Jesus thingy. Like, and so for 6 months, without exaggeration, I literally persecuted the daylight out of him.
What?
Oh, yeah.
Were you just like a thorn on his side? Like, I'm going to burn your Bible, and you're just poking fun at him all the time?
Yeah. No, I was worse than that, man. You got to understand, I'm an all or nothing type, and I just had a lot of rage in me that I lost my friend. And the long story short is, later my brother told me, the Holy Spirit actually told him, don't preach to Jeff because he'll only turn him away.
Yeah.
Pray for him. So I'm not exaggerating. This is another amazing story. My brother's my hero, man. He prayed for me every day and never preached at me. Even when I cussed at him, even when I spit on him, I would spit on him.
Wow.
I was crazy.
That's crazy.
That's crazy. I was a crazy dude, man. And I would spit on him, and he looked like Jesus to me. He just took it.
Huh.
He didn't respond back.
You mean like when Jesus was under trial and he remained silent? It was like that.
Yeah, in fact, in that Isaiah passage, as a sheep before his shearer is silent.
Yeah.
He didn't open his mouth.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a weakness. It was actually, he was strong.
Right.
He was praying for me. He told me this years later, and I was just weeping like, man, that's crazy. But so for 6 months, he's praying for me. I don't know. He's praying for me. And it was October of early November of 97. I decided I was going to blow my head off with a gun. Half my friends are already dead. A lot of suicide in Bethel, as you know, in the bush, especially people that are drinking and doing drugs. And I thought, you know what? I felt like my brother didn't like me anymore. Of course, I was just blind.
Yeah.
I couldn't see it.
Yeah.
And my parents actually were very upset with me too, because I was stealing money from them to buy drugs. So of course, I wasn't a very good
You weren't on their good side.
Yeah. So I felt like everybody didn't like me.
Yeah.
And so I decided, you know what? I'm going to take my dad's gun and blow my head off. And so the night I was thinking of doing this, this is a real important part of Genesis, my life, and why I'm sitting here. The night I thought of blowing my head off, I was laying in bed and my brother said, "Hey, Jeff." He rarely talked to me because anytime he talked to me, I'd just cuss him out.
Mm-hmm.
He said, "Hey, Jeff." And I was like, "What do you want?" Beep, 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 beep. And he said, "I love you." Man, I literally just cried because I was so confused. I was like, I just tortured my brother for 6 months on a daily basis. And he says, what's the chances that I'm going to blow my head off with a gun that night? And God uses my brother to say, "Hey, Jeff, I love you." And I put the covers over my head and I just wept, and I didn't even know I was weeping. And I said, "God, if you're real, you have to reveal yourself to me tomorrow. I'll give you one day before I kill myself." And so the next day is November 7th of 1997. The next day happened to be a Bible study at the Covenant Church where my brother went. And I went and I said, "All right, you love me?" I said, I'll go to your Bible study. I'll go to your Bible study, dude. So on November 7th of 1997, I walked into it. It was at the Moravian Seminary, is where the Covenant Bible study was at the time. And I walked in, and there was Tom Mute, my brother, a few students. And I remember thinking, this is so lame. This is what you gave your life to? Is this weird little group that sits and reads the Bible? And I didn't say this because I knew to be respectful in a religious environment.
Yes.
This is me talking to self.
Yes, I got it.
You know, you got it.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to tell you what happened as it happened. This is no exaggeration. This is no nothing. And it'll make more sense to you why I don't believe in a lot of, silly traditions that we put so much weight into, because I literally walked in to this Bible study. I literally sat in the chair and the Holy Spirit showed up and I wept for 90 minutes uncontrollably.
Wow.
There was no prayer. There was no worship. There was no sermon. There was no Bible study. And I didn't even realize I was crying for 90 minutes. And while I was weeping, I had a vision of Jesus hanging on a cross. I wasn't even high. This is the closest thing to what I think the Apostle Paul encountered. Because he was in one direction and he got literally blinded. Well, in my case, I literally couldn't stop crying for an hour and a half. And as I was crying, in my mind, I saw Jesus hanging on a cross. And he said, "Jeff, I'm the one you've been looking for your whole life. I am the Lord, and I will save you, but you have to choose me right now." this offer is not for tomorrow. Because you're going to blow your head off.
Right. That was the deal before.
You need, and he said, you told me if I was real. You didn't realize you prayed. You said, if you're real, you got one day. He's like, I am real. Here I am. And I literally muttered, yes, Lord.
And there was not even like a service, so to speak, that you just walked in the building and all that started. What was everyone else doing?
I'm going to tell you.
Okay.
So I opened my eyes. Tom Mute. I don't know if you know Tom Mute.
I know the Mute family. I've met a couple of them.
Anyways, he was a youth intern for the Covenant Church then.
Yeah.
And Shane Richardson, he came from Minnesota to be the youth pastor of the Covenant Church at the time. They said, Jeff, what happened? And I said, I saw Jesus. Just like my brother.
Just like your brother.
And they're like, they said, seriously? And I said, yeah. I feel like a 100-pound backpack just came off my back. They're like, wow. And Tom dedicated his life to youth ministry that day.
Wow, really?
Yep.
Tom Mute.
Yeah. He recently passed in this past year.
Yes.
I was there at that memorial service, bawling my eyes out. But Tom told me that because of what he witnessed, he gave his life to ministry that night. So I gave my life to Christ. He gave his life to the work of the ministry because he had never seen someone encounter God that powerfully in that moment. And the next day I was literally preaching the gospel in Bethel. In fact, and this is, you could ask anybody that's from Bethel, they let me share my testimony at my high school graduation in a public school. I wasn't even the, what do you call it? Valedictorian?
Yeah.
I wasn't the brightest dude, but my story and conversion was so evident. You know, I became one of the fastest runners in the region, cross country. I did 2 years of high school and 1 year because I failed because I was a druggie.
Yeah.
You could look at my literally 4 years of when I got saved. I went from F's to literally A's and B's.
Wow.
And they were like, you need to share your story at graduation. This is crazy. Like, and so at class of 2000 at the Bethel high school graduation, I got to share my testimony of a amazing God of grace, mercy, and love that reached down from heaven and saved me literally the day before I was going to blow my head off. And now 28 years later, almost, I got a wife and 4 kids and a tent making business called Genesis Coffee Lab, where we do kingdom work through coffee. It's a miracle.
Yeah. So you're a living miracle in my studio cabin. So let me ask you about that. You mentioned you used the term tent making business. I'm actually very interested in how does that work? Like, make the connection for me, a for-profit business and missions or ministry.
So when I read the New Testament, I thought, wow, the man that God chose to use to literally write half the New Testament was a tent maker.
Yeah.
He was in the mobile home industry of his time.
I'd never put it that way. That's good.
I love
Paul.
Good. What I love about Paul is he wasn't a moocher, and I'm going to explain what that means. He was so passionate about the gospel that he didn't rely on anybody's donations. He didn't rely on anybody's giving even to do what God called him to do. In fact, if you read some of his letters, he'll say that he worked tirelessly day and night to provide for himself and his companions to bring you the gospel.
Wow. Yeah.
And he had business partners. A lot of people don't know that. Priscilla and Aquila were his business partners. And so Jesus was a carpenter. Paul was a tent maker. Being a businessman or a tradesman, that's a part of the kingdom. And I don't want to get into the topic of, traditional missions, because I think just like traditional church and anything, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly. But what I think there's not enough of is models of how to do the Christian life, of how to do the kingdom lifestyle through working with your hands. I mean, imagine this and I'm not being negative. Imagine, going to a place like Ethiopia and they see this, international family with a brand new Land Cruiser and a huge compound, and a local says, well, how do you do that? They're like, well, we get support. And I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying you can't replicate that to somebody that is like, I don't have that.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's wrong either. I'm just saying at the end of the day, we need something we can replicate and people can understand work.
Yes.
And so I really feel that when we began our work in Ethiopia, the Holy Spirit actually told me, don't ever ask for $1. Ever. Watch me provide.
Wow.
I had a friend once.
How's that gone?
Amazing. We've never asked for a penny in our 20 years of working in Ethiopia. People have given, but I've never asked.
Yeah, sure.
I even had a friend who's a pastor say, hey, come preach at a church and we're going to take a donation to you. And I told him no. And he said, what? Why don't you want to come preach? You're going to get a donation for your Ethiopia work. I said, because the Holy Spirit told me not to ask. I'm just obeying, man. And it's like Paul said, if to you it's sin, but don't put that on others. So that's why I'm saying it's not everybody's calling and it's not the only way, but it's just what we've done is we feel that coffee, the coffee business, importing, roasting, it's our tent making for the kingdom. It's our avenue for preaching the gospel. Now, you got to understand this. This isn't like selling a cheap product to do the kingdom. Like we were actually named Best Roaster in Alaska for Food and Wine magazine.
Really?
Yeah. We have the worst though.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Food and Wine magazine is like the most respectable food and beverage source in the world.
Wow.
They named us 2 years ago Best Roaster in Alaska, top 50 roaster in America. And so when you commit your ways unto the Lord, when you give people an excellent product, and when you have an excellent vision, even the world will recognize it.
Wow.
And I don't say that boastfully. I say that as an actual testimony of what God has done in our tent making and our company, that even the world recognizes that we do things with excellence.
Yes.
And it's clear. I mean, Genesis is not it's a pretty Christian.
It's very obvious that it's
a lion,
word.
Lion of Judah. Okay. Our logo is literally Jesus Christ, the Lion of Judah.
Yeah.
We want to honor him in everything we do and lift him up. I mean, I love coffee. We have some of the best coffee in the world, but truly, it's just a tool for the gospel.
No, I really like that value of doing it with total excellence because you could just have some cheap product and make some money, but the quality of your product also reflects the quality of it, is what it's like to be part of God's kingdom. To treat customers well, to give them something to truly delight in, not just like I usually buy cheap coffee, confession, but to truly delight in a good cup of coffee does reflect our joy. And I love seeing believers having quality, good business practice. It's just, if everyone in the world did that, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's like what I mentioned earlier. If you ask your average person, what do you think about church? What I found, you'll rarely hear, those are the most generous, radical, kindest, non-judgmental, giving people ever. That's not what you're going to hear. And I think the same with even Christian businesses. I've noticed that just because you're a Christian business and you have a good vision doesn't mean you give people an okay product because your vision's so good. Like it's kind of like I don't want to name any organizations, but it's like when people sell you, popcorn for a cause, right?
Yeah, I know
and it's this toxic orange looking. It's like, is that even cheese? Like, is that nuclear cheese? And it's $50 a bin to support our cause. Well, we don't believe in that. We want to give someone a product that they could drink every day, and it's competitive, it's healthy, it's excellent, and if they love the vision, great, but it's not dependent on the vision.
Yeah, a friend of mine who I think my buddy Isaac Bedingfield.
We know that, dear brother.
We know him. Yeah. He's a very good friend, and he was telling me recently that his business called God's Country Aviation, that he said that he spent extra time. He won't say this publicly, so I'll say it for him. But he spent extra time and money that he didn't have to make like the lounge in his hangar extra nice. So like when customers came, they would walk in and go, "Oh wow, this is a place I want to spend some time in because it's beautiful, it's comfortable." And so there's that spending the extra money and time for extra excellence. It's not just good business practice, but it's good testimony. Yeah. It's valuing the people that walk in your door. And not even just for profit purposes, it's kingdom purposes. It's like we want to reflect the goodness that we have in us in a way. Yeah, love that. Okay, so tell me more about like you ship this from Ethiopia.
Yeah. So we are the only, and I want to stress only, importer of coffee in Alaska. Oh, let me explain what that means.
Okay.
We're the only coffee roasting company that knows exactly where our coffee comes from, and we import it ourselves.
So you're saying other coffee companies in Alaska,
they're buying from an importer.
What does that mean?
So what that means is, so if you're roasters, what they do is they need coffee. Mm-hmm. So where do you buy coffee? Where do you buy the raw product? From somebody bringing it in from the country.
Okay.
So there's a lot of importing companies in Washington and California that bring coffee into the United States, and a roaster just simply goes online, just like you do on Amazon, and goes click, 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 buy, ship it here.
Yeah.
We go to Ethiopia. We know the farmers. We know the people producing our coffee.
Yeah, I saw you.
And we're an importing company.
Okay.
So we have a little Genesis Coffee Incorporated. So we import coffee because we want to tell our customers, hey, we don't just know where our coffee comes from, but we know the entire process from the literal beginning. It'd be like let's flip it. It'd be like an African restaurant flying to Alaska to pick out all his salmon and flying it over to serve it in his African restaurant featuring Alaskan seafood.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So we decided to import because we want to support kingdom Christian businesses that produce our coffee. See, a lot of the coffee industry, and I'll say this, man, a lot of the coffee industry is child traffic slave laborers producing coffee. So we want to guarantee our customers that our coffee that's being produced, no one was raped through the process. Nobody was trafficked through the process. In fact, we could even say they're Christians. Wow. So from the beginning of from where the coffee comes from our Christian partners to us roasting it, it's kingdom 100%.
I know. Okay. I'm extremely naive about this. You just talked about, like when I buy great value coffee at Walmart, okay, because it's the cheapest one, and I'm trying not to be picky, and I'm living on a budget. And I have bought Genesis coffee when I'm indulgent because it's much better. But is the coffee I'm buying at, ignore any brands I mentioned like Great Value or whatever, but like a lot of those you're saying do come from these child labor things, and it's because that's what makes them cheaper. And like how prevalent is that?
Yeah. So without naming companies, you could probably figure it out. Mm-hmm. But let's just say some of the largest coffee companies in the world have admitted to child trafficking and slave laborers, and that being an issue.
Like as the source of their raw beans.
Correct. Yep. And I've heard some sources go as far as to say 95% plus of coffee in the world. So you got to understand this. Coffee is the largest consumed commodity on earth.
Oh, I just heard in the last few years it surpassed tea.
Okay. No. But yeah, listen. Coffee is the second largest commodity in the world. Oil?
What? No.
Coffee. Yeah.
More than oil.
No. Second to oil's number one.
Yeah, oil. Then
so coffee. The second largest. So really? The silver medal, the second largest commodity, not drink commodity. Period.
Yeah.
Is coffee. No. Billions of cups of coffee are drunk every day.
No way.
So imagine the corruption of the second largest commodity on earth.
Yeah.
Most of the world is not Christian. So, yes, there is a significant amount
So there's places in the world it's like child labor because it's cheaper and all of that, and they can sell it at the cheapest price to the big consumers like America.
Yeah, in fact, you could go to governmental websites.
Mm-hmm.
This is the government.
Yeah, okay?
Yeah. This is the U.S. government. Mm-hmm. This is the like FDA type of trade and commodities and all this.
Yeah,
and they have documented proof in percentages of how many traffic people are working in industries. So this isn't opinions.
Yeah.
This isn't a Genesis Coffee opinion. This is a governmental, international, recognized issue. Mm-hmm. Trafficking is the largest crime right now in the world. And you better believe that in the coffee, tea, cocoa, you just name any industry, clothing.
Yeah.
And coffee is significantly because that comes down to farming.
Yeah.
And we know that farmers are treated not very well around the world, especially in the third world.
Man.
So yeah, when people tell me about some of the coffee they drink, I don't judge. Mm-hmm. We're not supposed to judge.
Right.
But I educate and say, hey, would you drink coffee knowing that there's a good chance a lot of those workers were raked through the process? Mm-hmm. Would you pay $1 more or $2 more for a bag, knowing that you're actually supporting a kingdom business or a legitimate business that cares for the people? So we actually give 10% of our online sales back to Ethiopia. That's not the net, that's the gross. So when I say 10% of the sales, so for every $10 that comes in, we give $1 back.
And where does that go? Yeah. Like when you send it to Ethiopia, where does it go?
We have multiple ministries and churches that we're partnered with there.
Yeah.
And I can't fully disclose some of the things that we do there just because it'd be some of it is let's just say when it comes to working with trafficking and certain things, you don't want to disclose too much.
Sure. But sure.
We have a tremendous heart for women contemplating abortions. So one of the things we're going to try to do is buy an ultrasound machine.
Oh yeah.
So that we can
there's efforts even here that do that to
crisis pregnancy centers.
Yeah. So you can see the baby and hopefully
there's a we've sponsored kids. We've helped give scholarships to go to private school, Christian schools. We've helped with feeding programs. Like there's too many to name, and I'm not trying to pat ourselves on the back. I'm just saying we have more things in the works.
Wow.
Yeah. And we really believe in the gospel is supposed to be good news. That's what it means.
Right.
So good news to the poor is food. Mm-hmm. Good news to the poor is education. Mm-hmm. Good news to the poor is clothing. And so me and my wife, we're just very practical people. We have 4 kids. Mm-hmm. You have kids, you know this, right?
Oh yeah.
You can't just do like VBS with your kids. You can't just do a Bible reading. You have to parent them.
Yeah.
You have to raise them. You have to train them. You have to teach them things. And we want to, one of the specific things that we've sown into for the last 20 years is a school that's run by a local church. It started with 50 kindergarten kids in a mud hut. And there's about 1,200 students now.
Wow. No.
All the way through high school. And it's the highest the highest test scores in the whole region. And I'm talking like a Matsu Valley region size.
Okay.
The best scores are coming out of that school.
Wow. And it's just run by a local church.
It's run by a local church that's trying to do their best.
Wow.
All Christian teachers, chapel, is a Christian school, but they're basically like, hey, we want to just be the best Christian school. We want to disciple the next leaders of our nation. So they have to be academically, up there as well. So that is, you ask, how do we give back? That's one of the places we've given back specifically to raise the next generation. We've helped people and to disciple people ourselves that were literally on the street. And now they're married with businesses.
Wow.
That's what we believe.
Yeah.
That's why you mentioned earlier, like you have deep relationships. We have people that'll take a bullet for us there.
Wow.
Because that's what we believe church is. Churches where 2 or more come together in agreement. And they fulfill the great commandment, love one another. And so that's what we believe, that loving one another and helping people get to their God-given destiny through, whether it's just an injection of some money to go to school. That's raising the next generation, right? That's discipleship.
It's like another form of investment too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm fascinated by, like we just talked about, like, child labor, right? And so we want to sit here in our armchairs and say, well, the government should do something or whatever, but maybe we could start a business and buy, beans from a farm where we know that doesn't happen. And that is a way to fight that child labor issue rather than complain to the military or the government or whatever. It's as you say, more practical. And that's tent making. That's a form of tent making.
Tent making. It's totally tent making. So we got a long ways to go. We got a lot of dreams, and we have 4 boys, and it's really cool because our oldest, he graduated high school.
Oh, wow.
And so we through the mercy of God, we've raised one to adulthood. and we asked him, we said, son, we've never taught the American dream in our home. We teach our kids, what does God call you to do?
Yeah.
We teach them the Bible. What cross are you supposed to carry other than obviously your cross with him? But what do you feel like he's calling you to do? Not like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like, we don't teach that. And my son said, Dad, I want to help business to rescue kids.
I love that.
And man, as a father, I was just like, wow, this has nothing to do with coffee. This has to do with God's heart. And even our kids, all of them have a passion to help the poor. They've seen it. I mean, my son's been there like 7 times.
Yeah.
My 8-year-old's been there like 5 times already. And it's like, it's so cool to see these Alaskan kids that have it really good. Freezers full of fish and moose and all this stuff, but they're fully sober and aware of what's going on in most of the world.
Yes.
And I love that. I love that. They know that not everybody has a laptop and an iPad, that kids play with plastic bottles as their iPad and their toys and their games. And so yeah, we're a family business that cares about God's business of orphans and widows and the lost and the poor. And that's what Genesis is in a nutshell.
Yeah. Genesis Coffee Lab.
Yep.
Now, if I want to buy your product or check it out, what do I do?
Yeah, so we have a e-commerce website.
Okay.
So genesiscoffeelab.com.
I can put that in the show notes too.
Yep. So we actually have 2 roasteries. That's a whole nother story, but we have one in North Carolina and we have one in Alaska. So all of our Alaskan online orders, they get shipped from Alaska.
Yeah.
All of our online orders from Lower 48, they get shipped from North Carolina. So we cover coast to coast.
Wow.
Of the growth. And then locally here in Alaska, we're on every single Three Bears grocery store shelves. We really like Three Bears, and they've been very supportive of us and helping Alaskan locally owned businesses. So, and then they're even in their gas station.
And you mentioned some dreams for the future. Are you allowed to say any of those right now?
Yeah. So I'll share one. One of our dreams is to start a crisis pregnancy center.
Okay.
In Ethiopia.
Wow.
Because abortion is becoming, well, it's been rampant, but in the third world where they valued family more, it's actually becoming more westernized, sadly. And I love America. I'm American. I love American, but Western culture doesn't fit everywhere. And it's not necessarily like this is the best in the world,
Yeah.
But when people see Hollywood and see all these things and trends and stuff, this younger generation don't want to have kids.
Is abortion legal in Ethiopia?
I don't believe so, but
it happens. They don't enforce it. Like one of those things.
Yeah, it's bad. It's really, really bad. And then you add on top of that, I got to get my facts right, but I think it's close. I think it's one doctor to every 30,000 people in Ethiopia. So it's hard to just even get medical care.
Yeah, and just normal care. Yeah.
So we thought, man, what's something really practical we could do that literally makes eternal impact? That's literally saving babies.
Yeah.
There's a 50% chance a mom will not abort from an image alone.
Wow.
50%.
I've heard that stat before from crisis pregnancy commercials and stuff.
50% when they see a little baby, heartbeat through an image, not just like auditory, but just seeing. And as you know, we're partnered with hundreds of churches, so it's not just like, let's go save kids. Like, no. We could plug them into the church. We decide, right? Because as you know, as a parent, having a kid is just the beginning.
Well, it was a few episodes ago. I had a pastor on, and he was saying, he was talking about like women who've been divorced through bad relationships or whatever, like or a widower. We need to make it possible for these women to remain single. And I think in the similar way, we need to make it possible for these moms to be moms.
Yep.
And that's what church communities can do, and we could do so much better than we have done, of course.
So, you said dream, like, I'm a big dreamer because we have a big God, but man, I would love to see tons of these crisis pregnancy centers with direct connection to local churches.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when these moms come in, see the image, yes, I don't want to, then we have a whole team of like, well, let's plug you in then.
Now here's your support team.
That's right.
How much do these sonogram machines, are they expensive?
They actually are, because we believe in excellence. And what we don't want is a cheap machine that's going to break down. So I believe they're close to $20,000.
Okay.
And we actually had an anonymous person recently, just out of the blue. We didn't ask for anything, but they just like, here's $5,000 towards the machine in the future. So we got our first 5,000.
Yeah. Going towards your first machine.
Yeah. And
love that.
I hope it's the first of truly many.
Yeah. Jeffrey, this was awesome. Thank you for telling your story. And I will put in the show notes, genesiscoffeelab.com, and to check out your website and buy your product. And thank you for bringing me a bag. This is exciting. I think I might brew some up this afternoon because we have a little get together tonight and I'm tired and I need it.
Honored to be here. God bless you, man.
Yeah, thanks, Jeffrey. Appreciate it.